Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where we like to challenge the prevailing falsehoods of society. And before I begin with tonight's show, which is going to deal with why Christianity is having a really hard time right now in Western Europe and the United States, I would like to encourage people to check out my website. They don't have annotations anymore if this is in YouTube later. Go down into the comment section, have it linked right there. Check up on various articles I've written about this subject and many more. And also check out my latest science fiction novel, The Destiny of Our Past. And speaking of that particular book, which, of course, you can check that up on Amazon, The Destiny of Our Past, I deal with the importance of religion. And in this dystopian novel, set back in the era of Noah, about 3 months before the flood would be taking place, I deal with the idea that the ruling elite want to pretty much squash religion, at least any kind of true religion, within the masses. But at the same time, they're actually quite spiritual. They want to maintain spirituality within their particular caste. And I think really religion offers a very important element to the human condition. Now, of course, there's the idea of knowing where you're from, your origins, because depending on what you believe you originated from, that will determine how you will pattern your life now and in the future. Also, it provides a foundation by which people can question the prevailing norms of society and or the government. We saw how Catholicism was able to challenge the Soviet Union within Poland, and how that led to the destruction of the Warsaw Pact and ultimately the Soviet Union itself. And if it had been that the Poles would have become very secular, I think history would have been totally different than it turned out to be. And you can also see this in preserving a people's heritage. For instance, the Irish, Catholicism was very important to them as a way of maintaining their identity in the face of British oppression. And you can see this with religion in the colonies in the United States. Many people had left Europe because they were not allowed to practice religion as they felt the Bible said you should be able to practice it. Religion in much of Europe was so ingrained within the fabric of the state that essentially it became like if you went against something that the king said, you'd be told by your pastor or whatever, your bishop, that you were going against God. And so that kept people in check, but it also kept them somewhat ignorant of what was really in the Bible. And that is why many people left and came to the New World, so they could worship as they pleased. And later, this would help in the actual revolution. Religion was very instrumental in firing up the colonists and throwing the British out of the government in the United States. So religion is actually quite a powerful force. And I think that leaders of governments and people that want to have influence within the society understand that importance. And often they will actually seek to minimize that importance because, well, it may go against objectives of the state. I can give you a good example. You may have a situation in which the state decides that a particular country, they have too many kids. And the birth rate's too high. And they may find that the reason why people are having lots of kids is because the religion of that country is against birth control. So then what you would have to do is you would have to start chipping away at the legitimacy of the religion in order to get people to question the religion in reference to birth control. Now, if in time people start losing their I'm not going to say loyalty, but their, I guess I could use the word conformity. Conformity to the teachings of that particular religion, because they can still stay in the religion, but they start questioning such things as, well, birth control, abortion, stuff like that. Then that religion no longer is a threat to the objectives of the state. So therefore, it will be left to practice as it will, but ultimately when this happens, this somewhat castrates that religion, so that as time goes on, it becomes more and more and more meaningless in people's daily life. So this is something that's quite interesting. When a religion compromises with the state, it actually is setting the stage for its own demise. Now, before in Europe, the state used religion to keep control of the masses. And it was, the state saw it as important to maintain the religion, often with taxes allocated to building religious buildings and so forth, maintaining missions overseas, that it was a symbiotic or mutual benefit to the state and to the religion, and therefore the religion was, promoted. But in recent years, or recent decades, I should say, there has been somewhat of a discounting of that. As secularism has grown in the minds of the people, and that's been promoted by the various secular governments, primarily in the West and in North America, the idea that religion needs to be preserved has diminished. In fact, many European countries 30 years ago, if you're born in that country, you automatically became a member of that church. It was just assumed that whatever the major church of the country was, you were kind of listed as a member. But most of that has changed now because the lack of people really going to church. And the state's fine with that. And in many areas, what you see, and I'm going to get into this in just a moment, religion has become somewhat of an arm of the state in the sense that it has become like a social worker kind of thing. Something that is out there to maybe be an auxiliary for helping the homeless or something like that. But not something that questions the government, really. Not a force that says, hey, wait, the government's wrong here, like the Catholic Church did in regards to the Soviet Union. And, well, I think I want to go into some of the reasons why I'm going to give some reasons why I think Christianity is losing its importance and what could be done to turn this around big time. Okay? I don't like to use the word revival because that's usually associated with like Pentecostal religion and so forth, and I'm not a Pentecostal. But you could think of it in that sense of a revival. And we have to remember that this has happened in the past. Before the late 1820s and early 1830s, when America had a very major awakening, they call it the Great Awakening, religious attendance between the Revolutionary War and that time was actually really low in the colonies. Now, that didn't mean that people didn't have a Bible and read it, and their families read, and so on. I mean, they were Christian by and large. It's just that, maybe the character of the that had come over was sort of like, no one could tell me to go to church, and to a large degree, they had left countries that had mandated church attendance. But church attendance was really low until that happened, and all of a sudden it just took off on the East Coast and even extending down into the West and down to the South. This Great Awakening. And it created a lot of interest in religion, and it has had an effect on the United States ever since. And there's been other periods, too, where religious attendance has gone down, and then suddenly, whoom, goes way up. Down and then up, like that. But right now, I think we're on kind of a downslope, and that can be changed. It really can. But first, I'm going to list the reasons why I think we're on that downslope. And, of course, there's the first one is a sense of affluence. And, what I'm saying affluence is because I want to actually push this out immediately. Some people think, well, once people get some money, religion becomes less important. But if you actually read up on church attendance, you find that church attendance is generally associated with having a higher education and a higher income. That's right. Actually, the idea that religion is something for the poor or the desperate is actually false, at least when it comes to the United States. It tends to be the people who have an education and have resources that do find a connection when it comes to religion. Okay, so I'm going to deal with consumerism in a moment, but let's just get rid of this whole idea that, the reason people don't go to church is because of they have enough that they're comfortable, their stomachs are full, they have things to do, they have things to buy. That's not the reason ultimately, but there is something associated with it, and I'm going to get to that. Okay, so let's look at some of the... I think actually, to be honest, Christianity in the West is in the United States to a degree, but really in Western Europe, is that it's off code. Now, that's a marketing term, which means something like, it would have been like, I heard, let's say you're kind of old and you're trying to talk to young people, and you're saying, hey, I really relate to you. In fact, are you guys on MySpace? And these young people would be looking at you like, oh, whoa, what is that? And then someone would say, yeah, I heard that was something like Facebook quite some time ago. But you've automatically lost connection with the young people there. And that can happen throughout a society where you can be off code in that you're promoting yourself in one respect, or you're identified in one respect, but people don't want that. If you're off code, you're just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'd rather not be associated with you. And I think that's happened to Christianity to a very large degree. And let me give you some of the reasons for that. And again, you may think, well, this is unfair. I don't agree with this. My church isn't like that. But I'm talking in generalities. And I'm talking about all of Western culture. I'm not just talking about the United States. Although it is applicable to the United States because it could wind up becoming the rule here as much as it is in Europe or Australia. Okay? So let's go ahead and continue here. First of all, I think to a large degree, if you were to do focus groups on people that don't go to church, you'd find that if you asked them, what do you associate with Christianity? And, well, there'd be a certain number that would say, oh, it's bigoted, it's this, and this, because of the moral codes. And I'm not going to get into those right now, but the moral stands and so forth, I don't think are ultimately the reason for the decline. It's the reason why people might give for the decline, but it's not the reason. Okay? It's that kind of marketing thing where a person they'll choose a middle-aged guy might buy a really fancy sports car, and you ask him, well, why'd you buy the sports car? And he'll say, oh, because it's really cool and it's fun to drive. When if you actually found out his reasons subconsciously, it might be to prove that he's still virile and he's still trying to be attractive to the women, even though he may be happily married. This is why many brands of sports cars are like over 90% of the purchases are done by men. Okay, it is that, that's the true reason. But everyone will always try to give a rational reason as to why they choose or don't choose something, when usually that's the periphery. You got to scratch below the surface to find out what the true reasons are. Now, let's take a look at some of the things I think are the problem. One is, and I remember I used that term, castrated. It's seen as submissive. And it's seen as kind of this idea that Christians are supposed to be mild and meek. And remember, look up what the word meek in the Bible actually does mean when it's translated into Hebrew. Okay, it means something different, I think, than most people really think that it does mean. But submissive, it's considered anti-intellectual. It's whether fair or not, and I just now said, research shows that people with higher educations tend to go to church more than those with lower educations. But whether it's because of the media or public schools or whatever, it's seen as anti-intellectual. In fact, in Europe, at least in Northern Europe, the idea people have there is that religion is something for people that they'll get rid of once they get educated. And to a large degree, I think that's why when they don't see really a problem with immigration from countries that may be really conservative in their religions, because they believe that once they're there a few years, they'll blend into the society. Okay? Because there really is, and it's a very false notion. It's an arrogant notion, believing that people will, once they are just told how, religion's so backward and religion's no longer meaningful, that people will just go, yeah, you're right, and let's go party now. That's not the case. Okay? It's not the case. But that's what many secular people in Europe believe. So it really shakes them up if you say, oh, by the way, this person that just won the Nobel Prize in, I don't know, physics or something is highly religious. And they'll be like, whoa, how can that be? That's what goes through their minds automatically, not just people in a sociology department at a university in the United States, but the general population has those kinds of notions. So religion's not faring very well in at least Northern and Western Europe. Okay? But you got submissive, anti-intellectual, non-confrontational. Now, that's actually quite interesting. Now, I don't mean confrontation like, going and picking a fight. Finding someone who's an atheist and shaking them around a little bit and threatening them if they don't go to church. I don't mean that. But what I mean by non-controversial is this idea that, you have your religion and you just kind of hide it. You don't let anyone know. And you keep it a secret. because you're afraid of how maybe people react to it. But it doesn't matter, really. It's still it has turned Christianity into seeming like a very non-confrontational thing. It is seen as quiet. So if you're actually going to create a person who is the typical Christian in a marketing sense, if you're going to create that hypothetical individual, this would be a very, very quiet, passive person who's unwilling to engage you in any kind of debate on your beliefs. So this is not something that's necessarily seen as a wonderful thing. It's not going to attract people, especially men. Now, I should say it's not going to attract young men. Young men are highly, they're like in all societies. The young men are the warriors. They're the ones who are the champions, whether it be of the country or of the faith. And, you got like Mormons, for instance, send young men, 19 years of age out to do missions all over the world. And, there's people that think, how can you send a 19-year-old, they'll say boy, a 19-year-old's not a boy, but I guess in today's pampered society, people would think they are. How can you send a 19-year-old boy to a remote region of Paraguay to share religion in a country that has, it's not any way close to being Mormon? The thing is, this is the way it used to be. Okay? Young. King David, when he took on Goliath, was supposed to be 14. Mary, when she was impregnated with Jesus, was about 13 or 14 years of age. So today's notion that young people shouldn't really engage in this proselytizing or something like that is something that weakens all, the various Christian denominations. And if you have this kind of sense that to be a Christian, you got to be the quiet person, and so forth, young men don't like to hear that. Young men are attracted to the loud and strong and boisterous and the willing to take on the world sort of ideal. And if Christianity is opposite of that, they'll think, not for me. And something, young women tend to be more attracted to that more alpha male, take on the world sort of personality. And so if you combine that with the idea that, there's not going to be too many young men going to church functions, whatever your church function or church might be, then they have no reason really to find connection with their religion, especially when your religion is saying, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. Back to the moral codes. I said the moral codes are not the reason why people are veering away from religion, but they are an aspect of it. And if you tell someone, you can't do this and this and this, at the same time, there's no avenue for them to meet someone so they can do this and this and this with them once the wedding ring's on, then what's to attract them? Okay, then you're going to wind up like with the old Soviet Union, where the only people going to church are old women on pensions. Now, another thing is birth rates. Now, back in the early 1960s, before the sexual revolution and all this kind of stuff, the birth rate amongst secular people, not really religious, they might believe in God, but, they didn't go to church or feel they might have been the kind of, I have this image of a college professor or something like that, with the messed up hair and so forth. But their birth rate in those days was higher than the Christian birth rate today. And that's quite fascinating because Christians back in those days were very critical of the people who were limiting their families to, 2 or 3 kids. Extremely critical. And that's not too long ago, early 1960s. And now we have the Christian population has kind of drifted into this idea of, hey, everyone else has a couple kids, well, I'll have a couple kids, or less even. And Christian churches, they don't say that much about divorce anymore because, well, I don't want to offend that one guy who's the real estate developer working on his second trophy wife, but he always contributes a lot to the building fund, doesn't he? So you don't want to offend him by giving any sermons against divorce. And when it comes to family size, you don't want to be seen as behind the times. So, you give kind of a weak sermon on what, things in the Bible that, it will please everyone. Well, again, you go back into this idea that, well, this becomes a passive religion. But also the idea that your birth rates are going to plummet to the same level as the general society. Because most people conform to whatever the norm is of society. Okay, we do have a norm in our society that you have a boy, and then you have a girl, and then everyone says, oh, aren't you lucky you had one of each? Notice they say, had. Okay, so the idea that goes through someone's mind is, oh, I'm finished. I've got my 2 kids. When in 1960, it would be like, yeah, I wonder what the next one's going to be. Okay, that's a very important difference. And if you'd have asked that person in 1960, oh, you're going to have more than 2 kids. Why is that? They would say, well, the Bible extols the virtue of having a large family. So that would be at least something they could fall back on those evenings where, the baby's up with colic or something, and they're kind of like, oh, maybe we should have stopped it too. But they would think to themselves, no, that's not right. Okay? And later they're thinking, after they've had maybe 4 kids, they're thinking, gosh, I wish we'd have had another. That's the way often religious people, or the people back in the early 60s would have thought. But nowadays, no. Why, you got lots of situations. I've seen a lot of these cases where man and woman, they get married in their mid-20s. They have a couple kids. He gets a vasectomy, or she gets tubal ligation, or both. And, they go along for 10, 15 years. They get divorced. And then now, he meets a woman who's not got any kids, but she loves him, so they get married. And, of course, she's never going to have kids because that decision that was made earlier on. And he's not going to go to the trouble of trying to reverse the vasectomy. It's expensive, and it may not even work. So they just they buy a couple dogs or something. And this attitude is very, I think it's as much pervasive in Christian culture today, especially in European Christian culture, but, even in American culture, very pervasive. In fact, I've heard people tell me they're from the South, the Bible Belt, hardcore, Trump land, I guess you could call it, that if you have like 3 kids, people look at you funny. It used to be on the East Coast 20 years ago. If you had 3 kids, people looked at you funny. But now, on the East Coast, if you have any kids, people look at you funny in middle-class neighborhoods. And if you have 3 kids in the Bible Belt, people look at you funny. I've even heard that in even Mormons, that, once a woman has maybe 3 kids, people are thinking, well, are you going to have any more? And it's actually a serious question. It's not like hey, you got to have some more, or like that. It's kind of like there's this, okay, maybe 3 is more than other people have, and my religion is associated with having big families, so we'll stop here. So this attitude has really reduced the number of Christians, the growth of Christianity. If you look on a worldwide scale, the places where Christianity is growing are countries like in Africa and parts of South America and maybe the Philippines. And those are areas where people are Christian and they still have larger families. Europe is shrinking. It's getting old. It's shrinking. And if it wasn't for immigration, and ironically, very few of those, percentage-wise, those immigrants are from Christian nations. If it wasn't for that immigration, though, they would be on their way to economic and, fading away. Turn the lights out, last person alive, type thing. And so here's an area where it is actually quite critical in why Christianity is, Christianity in North America is going to follow the same route as Northwestern Europe. It's going to just start kind of shrinking, becoming old, like the mainstream churches were maybe 50 years ago. You walk into a mainstream Protestant church and it's just a sea of gray hair. Same thing's happening right now in much of even North American conservative religions. Now, how do we revitalize Christianity? How do we turn this around? Well, the one question we have to look at is, do we want it to? I think one of the major problems facing Western society today, and it's brought on by consumerism to a very large degree, because consumerism has become the religion of the masses. The idea of I am what I buy, I can judge another person based on the brand name he or she has on their purse or their pants or their car. And when something gets old, wears out, throw it away and get something new. And we start applying that to people too, which is really unfortunate. But Christianity's up against this. It's tried to compromise with it, but it's impossible. You cannot have any of the Abrahamic religions really comfortable with the tenets of consumerism. So what do you put in its place? You've got to be able to sell the idea that what you have is better than what's on the glitzy stuff on TV or the internet or the fancy stores. I remember watching, has something to do with the birth rate thing. I remember watching a TV news show back when you could actually trust the news. And it was on the Italian birth rate and how it had plummeted. It's been that way now for like 15, 20 years, way below replacement. And they were interviewing young women. They were like, oh, I want to go shopping. I want to buy designer handbags. I don't want to be just, at home raising a baby. Well, you see what I mean? You've got to sell the idea. And, we're exposed 24 hours a day to a culture, either electronically or just around the people we associate with, that is immersed in consumerism. So how do we break it? Well, here's how we do that. One is people of the various Christian religions have to be bold. And like I said before, you don't have to be confrontational. You don't have to pick fights. But you shouldn't back down. You should be proud of who you are or what you represent. And then tell people that. Not to beat them on the heads if they have a different religion, but to just express your opinions. And actually, your pool of people that you want interested in whatever you believe in should actually be the secular, the non-religious. Okay? I think a lot of churches waste their time on bashing other religions when they should be promoting their own. And instead of doing that, because no one's going to join your religion just because you happen to beat up their religion. Okay? If someone's We won't be sexist here. If your mother gets beat up by your friend's mother, and you don't decide, okay, I'm just going to go and live with my friend's family now. No one does that. So it should be seen as not these religions that waste their freaking time on attacking each other. It should be reaching the masses. Okay? Reaching the people and expressing what you have to offer. 2, you have to go back to promoting traditional families. Because biology is destiny. Children carry on your culture. And now people are thinking, oh my gosh, we can't do that in today's society, not with people's view of what's important and so forth. Well, then fine. Then give up. There'll be probably some other religion or group of people who will continue with those family values and replace you. Okay? Your church will make a great, maybe art gallery someday or something like that when it gets sold off. The thing is, I'm being blunt here. If you don't, if people aren't reproducing at levels that will keep their particular brand of religion at least replenished, if not growing. Actually, I don't believe in stagnation. You're either growing or you're shrinking. So growing should be your goal. Then bye-bye that group or religion. Okay? The idea even of 2 kids in a family being enough. It's not. Because you're going to have maybe one of your kids quits the religion, goes off and does something else. Well, if your other has 2 kids, well, you're taking all, you see what I'm saying? It's shrinking. It's a reverse pyramid. You have that pyramid, the population pyramid. Turn it over. And that's what's happening to a large degree. Someone has a couple kids, and no one reproduces. I know many families like this, of all faiths, in which they had just a couple kids. And maybe I know one case where the girl in that religion stayed very devout, but she was dead set on not marrying someone outside her religion. She'd be about 50 right now. So, and no kids. So, once she's gone, it's over there. Her brother wasn't active in the religion. So even if he did have any kids, they're not part of that religion. So that's the end of that. And this is really, really quite common nowadays. So, if you want cultural suicide, shoot for 2. Okay? If you want growth, then you got to have more kids than 2. And certainly there's going to be a lot of people out there in your group that can't have kids or for some reason or another won't have kids. So think about it in that sense. Go into think about that in a cultural sense. Walk into a store and then add to ages and then assume that add 20 years to the people in that store and then assume that the people that are young will have kids. And normally you'll think to yourself in mental terms, my gosh, this store will be empty in 20 years. Okay? Because maybe the people that are maybe at this time 60 or 70, many of them won't be here in 20 years. So therefore, if they don't get replaced, again, shrink. That's the way it goes. Give a clear alternative to Western consumerism. Western consumerism leaves a void in people's lives. Okay? It leaves a void. It is not something that's going to make someone feel happy. It is not any more than when you give a Christmas present to a kid and they're all happy and joyful for a few minutes and then the toy just winds up in the closet. Well, There's no difference in size. When people are older, they buy something, and at first they're like, this is so fantastic, I'm finally able to afford this. And then as time goes on, they're like, oh, yeah, okay, not such a big deal. And Western consumerism is just based on this idea of sell something to someone, and by the time they have it, convince them they need something better. That's all Western consumerism is. Buy, 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 and buy. Never ending. Never satisfied. And you've got to provide a clear alternative to that. It can't be, you can be just as materialistic as your friends and be a part of this religion. It doesn't fit. It never will. One will give or the other. And nowadays it is consumerism that's beating Christianity hands down. Okay? Now, so you have to give a clear alternative, a different lifestyle, something that has meaning, even though it's different, and you might think, oh my gosh, who's going to want to be like this? Well, you know what? There's plenty of people out there that are dissatisfied with Western culture as it now stands. Okay? The consumerism. And would be more than happy to explore other avenues. So, this is something that has to be done or else forget it. You also have to give application. Now, you need to market the idea of why someone would be willing to accept membership and participation in a movement that's going to mean that they can't sleep in on Sundays. If you got to find out what it is that's important in their lives and then go from there. Show how if they become a member of your particular religion, it means something. Now, it used to be that you sort of had the idea that if you were a member of a conservative religion, including Catholicism, that at least you knew that you had more marriage security, for instance, if you were a member of those religions. In recent years, many of those religions have become very lax on that kind. Well, it doesn't matter if someone's divorced, Well, what was the reason? Left the toilet seat up? Okay, irreconcilable differences. No big deal. Well, that's a problem. For one thing, if you have divorce, people, the kids usually gravitate away from the religion, especially if that religion says divorce is wrong, but still, takes a kind of a lax attitude towards it. But, it used to be at least that if you wanted to have marriage security, that was one reason why maybe, go with the wife or the husband to church on Sunday morning. There used to be the idea that if you were a member of a religion, there was a sense of community, people bonding together, kind of like a big family outside of your biological family even. And it meant connections to the outside world. Oh, my son is looking for a job. Your 16-year-old son's looking for a job. Do you have any knowledge of where, are there any openings where you work? This sort of connection. See, we don't have those connections anymore. The poor millennials, everyone beats up on the millennials, not realizing that they're not as apt to be religious anymore, members of religions, and they're not apt at being married in their early 20s as people were 40 years ago. So they don't have social support, nor do they have networking. And sorry, internet networking is not as efficient as personal networking. But this is just a couple things that could be things where you have application, meaning that it's worth it for someone to get up on Sunday and to do something, or it's worth it for them to give up alcohol, or it's worth it for them to this, that, or whatever. Okay? You've got to show the application, though. And finally, you have to be visible. Okay? You have to make sure that you're not the invisible. When you die and suddenly it's like, I didn't know he was this or she was that. I would never have known. You've got to let people know. Now, again, that doesn't mean you walk in, at work. It's like, hey, everyone, look at me. I'm not like that. But you can say things. Just make a comment about, oh, I had this great time at a church activity this weekend. When they say, what'd you do this weekend? And then they start realizing, oh, you're a member of a church. And then later they'll ask you questions. So you have to share it. Because if you're not sharing it, it becomes something that you become ashamed of, and you'll gravitate away someday. And if you're not sharing, then other people won't bother to ask you. So if it's important enough to you to get up on Sunday, and go to church instead of going fishing that day, or whatever, then people at least have to see why it's important in your life. And therefore, you will be able to make connections to people and interest them. And eventually, maybe some of them might start asking, hey, when do you guys meet? I'd like to come check you guys out. So ultimately, these are things that people need to do. If they don't, then, like I said, Christianity will be just something that fades away and ceases to be of any importance. And to be honest with you, I've read some of the journals dealing with what the future is supposed to be like. And this is very interesting, and please take note. Again, this goes against what Western European people think about religion. It's one of the things talking about life in around 2030 or 2040 is that as there's less poverty on the planet and people have more education and you have more people moving into the middle class worldwide, interest in traditional religion will magnify. That's right. It won't decrease. It will go up. So, be ahead of the curve. If you want to be part of that future. And I think the future is a great place. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah, there's some weird stuff out there. Again, I deal with that in my book, Destiny of Our Past, the whole idea that, you could wind up with some really strange science in the future that will affect what it even means to be human. But it still is going to be a fantastic time. And if you carry that vision with you, then I think you're going to see some success. Anyway, I found it very, very, I would say encouraging that there's an article in The Hill, and it's reporting a poll that was done by it's a Harvard-Harris poll, and it says here, quote, 65% of voters believe there is a lot of fake news in the mainstream media. Now, they break this down. They break this down into the alignment of the people. 80% of the Republicans agree that there's a lot of fake news in the mainstream media. 60% of independents and 53% of Democrats. And I think that's very telling. Because ultimately that shows there's an ideological perspective here. Now, if the mainstream media were being perceived as leaning to conservative, I would bet that would be reversed, that you would find 80% of Democrats. But I think since it is generally leaning to the left of center, certainly to the left in regards to American political culture, you do find that just about half of the Democrats agree that it is there's a lot of fake news out there in the mainstream media. And it could be that if you get what's called confirmation bias, okay, let's say you're liberal, okay, let's say you're a Democrat and you're a liberal, and you're watching something that's demonizing Republicans, then your confirmation bias is, well, I don't like Republicans. This newscaster or commentator is criticizing Republicans. Therefore, it must be correct. Okay, so that's why I think you find that since the media is liberal, that you're going to find only around a little over 50% of the Democrats agree that there's a lot of fake news in the mainstream media. Now, the thing I find, though, most encouraging is that 65% of people are questioning the dominant paradigm. You see, we were raised to believe what we see on TV. Well, it's true. Come on. I mean, there's the idea that your public schools teach you that the media is there to keep an eye on what's going on and to inform us. Your parents, if you watch them, turn on an evening news show and watch it. And let's say they don't really criticize it. They just like, oh yeah, I saw this on the news the other day. You get an idea that it's correct. And so when you have the family, probably most people you know, and then the education system telling you that you can trust the media, then you're going to wind up trusting the media. And of course, what's really throwing a wedge into that, though, it's like, someone's riding their bike down the street and someone throws a branch into their wheel spokes and they go flipping over. Kind of saw this happen the other day. No one threw something in, but this guy wasn't paying attention. His bike flipped over. He didn't get hurt, though, fortunately. But it's the same kind of concept. The internet has done that. The internet is that branch being thrown in the spokes that's causing this whole paradigm to shift. Because you can hear something in the media, and then you're thinking, well, I gotta go check that out. And you go check it out on the internet, and you find out that the story you heard on your news is not correct. Or it's at least misleading. It's and pretty soon you start getting tired of the innuendo. And it's really causes a question. And with social media, people are sharing stuff. Now, of course, I'll admit there's some stuff out there from both the left and the right, because I belong to a lot of social media groups, and so I get this stuff that immediately I recognize what stuff you can't trust and which you can, and it's on both sides. But I think most people with an IQ above room temperature can figure out what's fake and what isn't. Okay, so we don't need liberals or someone coming along saying, well, we're going to have a fact check on this or something like that, because ultimately you may fall into this same idea that, well, people I disagree with must be wrong, therefore it must be fake. Okay, and that goes both ways, Republicans and Democrats, both. But confirmation bias is really, really quite a dangerous thing. Now, what can we do to make sure that this figure goes from 65 to, let's say, 75% in the next year? That's right. Let's take it. Let's take it as a goal. I'm not saying everyone should just boycott any news show or anything. What I am saying is people need to be more critical. We need to employ critical thinking skills. And I would really encourage people to do a couple of things here. And it's really quite easy. One is I noticed that in a lot of social media, instead of people having things that are more grassroots, they just share things from news sites and organizations that while they may be considered alternative in the general sense in the American political culture, they're pretty establishment in the sense that they're just a competition to the dominant media. And I think there's a danger in just sharing that, because it's just like that South Park episode where they defeat Walmart, and then the little store down the street is now able to survive. But then you see later that it becomes a Walmart. So, sometimes you have to wonder what happens when, maybe you would defeat the mainstream media, and then just the alternative media then becomes the mainstream media, and so on. I think that we need to have a little bit more grassroots stuff, and I would really encourage people to create your own blogs. And yes, of course, you're going to quote stuff from various sources within your blogs, but we need to have perspective from general everyday people on current events and where we should go as a country. And, a little bit of that old hippie participatory democracy stuff going on. So create a blog. Share it on social media. Yeah, you can put it as a link with something that you agree with or disagree with, and share it that way. It doesn't take long to do. A lot of times I see people write in social media, they might write several paragraphs, and maybe what they should have done is just take those several paragraphs and make it a blog entry, and then share it. And, as time goes on, if it grows, then people will start happening upon your blog. Also, try this summer to do some YouTube videos. If it's just nothing more than filming yourself. Film yourself giving commentary on something. Let it out. Don't just sit there with your friends or your spouse or your kids and gripe. Put it out there on the internet. Keep it legal. Don't defame people unfairly or do libel. But just get out there and share it, because you may reach people that never would have considered your point of view. And in that sense, you're educating, and you're kind of giving a balance out there. Your opinion means just as much as anyone else's. And if you share it out there, you may touch other people's lives that either have your opinion, or maybe they've never thought of something that you just brought up, and they have this epiphany like, wow, that's right. But it's not hard to try. Just a few minutes. You don't have to be the most beautiful person or the most articulate. Just get it out there. So do this, please. This summer, try. Create a blog, write a few things down, put it out there, use it as a tag when you, or just as a link when you make social media commentary, and also do a YouTube video. And you can link these kinds of things together to where one brings in traffic for the other, and so on. And you may only reach maybe a dozen people a week, but that's a dozen people. Now, if there's thousands of people that do this, we're talking serious numbers. So you want to raise that figure? You want to go from 65 to 75 in the next year? You can do it. It's up to you. Anyway, that's all the time we have now. I encourage you to make this your summer resolution. And also, another summer resolution, make sure to tune in next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Take care now.